Take a good look at this. It might look like raw metal in a forge, but what you don't know is just one of these can power 60,000 homes. A bigger version can power a city the size of Cleveland. It produces 8,000 times more energy than fossil fuels, with none of the carbon dioxide or air pollution. That's right, 0 emissions at a fraction of the cost of fossil fuels and a fraction of the waste. It's the safest, cleanest, most powerful energy in history. And it's made in America. The Pentagon's got plans to power our military bases with it, and even power towns and cities across America following a natural disaster. Recently, Congress approved billions for a massive rollout of this technology, not 10 years from now, but this year. Right now, the highest levels of our government are calling it pivotal, critical, and the key to America's economic and geopolitical future. Its biggest supporters include folks I know, like Warren Buffett and Michael Burry, plus legendary tech billionaires like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Peter Thiel, Sam Altman, Mark Benioff, and Elon Musk. Meanwhile, it's one of the only issues uniting both sides of the aisle in Washington, D.C., and will continue to do so no matter who's in the White House. Mark my words, this technology will create more wealth than you've likely ever seen before or imagined. I'm talking almost 3 times more wealth than artificial intelligence, 6 times more than the automobile, 76 times more than the smartphone, and 138 times more than the personal computer. And we're only just seeing the start of the growing demand for this technology. Experts say it could surge more than 12,000% in the coming years and blossom into a $40 trillion industry. In a moment, I'll show you how this object is at the heart of an energy revolution, who's involved, how it works, and how it could make you rich. But first, it's important you know who I am and why I'm so certain of what's coming. My name is Whitney Tilson. You might recognize me from places like 60 Minutes, CNBC, CNN, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, and Fox Business, among others. For years, I ran a hedge fund where I personally grew the firm's assets under management from $1 million to more than $200 million. I outperformed the S&P for more than a decade and tripled my clients' money while the market was flat. I credit much of my success to my ability to spot pivotal, game-changing financial events well in advance, including the dot-com bust, the housing bubble and the subprime mortgage crisis, the crash of 2008 and the market bottom that followed it, including the collapse of Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, the 2017 peak in Bitcoin to the exact day, and the beginning of the post-COVID stock market rally. So many of my predictions have come true that CNBC nicknamed me the Prophet. Now, I'm thrilled I've been able to help folks navigate some of the most important financial events of our lifetime. Finding great investment ideas is my passion. Name any of the most popular investments of the past 25 years, and I probably bought or recommended them before they made historic profits. I bought Amazon stock in the late 1990s when it was just at a split-adjusted price of only $2.41. Today it's worth around $180. I bought Apple in 2000 when it was just 35 cents a share, again adjusted for splits. Today it's worth around $200. And in 2012, I told viewers on CNBC that Netflix, on the very day it hit a multi-year low, was going to be the next decade's Amazon. At the time, Netflix was $7.78 a share. 9 years later, the stock hit $700. I've picked other stocks you'd recognize, like Berkshire Hathaway, AOL, McDonald's, Microsoft, Dell, Intel, and Yahoo. Plus stocks many folks would write off as boring and not worth their time, like Ross Stores, Home Depot, AutoZone, and Tractor Supply. But since I recommended them, they've soared from 2,000% to as much as 29,000%. I don't share any of this with you to brag. Far from it. But it's important you know what I've done and why you should take me seriously, especially before you hear the rest of my story. I tell you this because new developments, like the kind I'm going to tell you about today, always seem impossible until they're here. But by then, it's too late to do anything about them, and much harder to get rich off them. Think about e-commerce. The idea of buying everything you need online seemed crazy until Amazon took off. But I saw its potential back in the late 1990s, before everyone was talking about it, let alone using Amazon Prime to buy groceries. Since I bought Amazon in 1999, the stock split 20 for 1 and jumped as high as 6,570%. That's why it's so important you hear the story I'm about to share with you. If things go the way I'm seeing, it could make early investors massive gains, just like it did with Amazon shareholders. Soon, you may see this technology everywhere. Uncle Sam will make sure of it. Both sides of the aisle in Congress are throwing money at this. They've approved $80 billion to roll it out nationwide, with billions more possibly coming before the end of this year. What is going on, and why is this such a priority for Washington? 2 words: clean energy. Now, I'm not here to debate or talk politics. My job is simply to spot trends and help you profit on them. And the fact is, clean energy is happening no matter how we feel about it. 70 countries have pledged to end carbon emissions and transition to clean energy by 2050. America vows to get it done by 2035. That means between now and then, we're supposed to grow our renewable energy usage by 20% a year. Do I think we can do that? Not a chance. We've spent the past 20 years and invested $5 trillion in renewables already. And what do we have to show for it? Well, let's look. Wind and solar only provide 14% of America's current energy needs, and our carbon emissions have remained essentially unchanged. 20 years of green energy investment, and we've barely moved the needle. Now we're expected to grow renewables 20% a year? Not likely. Don't get me wrong, renewables have their place, but they were never meant to be our primary energy source. For one thing, America doesn't have the materials to build enough renewables to meet our energy needs. You need a lot of metal and rare earth minerals to build solar panels and wind turbines, let alone a fleet big enough to completely power America. And if you're wondering, what are rare earth minerals? They're a critical ingredient in everything from renewable energy to laptops and big screen TVs. Society literally can't function without them. This is a huge problem because we don't have enough rare earth minerals as it is. The world needs almost 400 new mines just to keep up with demand. Right now, the U.S. only has one out in California. 17 rare earth minerals don't get mined in America at all. We're 100% dependent on foreign imports. Guess who's our number one supplier? China. Do we really want to give China more leverage over us? The other problem is, some renewables need 10 times more land than coal plants. To power America on solar and wind, we would need spare land the size of Texas. So I don't care what anybody tells you. Renewables won't get us to zero carbon. And by the way, a transition is actually the least of our problems. The biggest issue is we need far more energy than most people realize. In the past 200 years, energy consumption jumped 3,000%. If that sounds like a lot, just wait. McKinsey says that's going to triple between now and 2050. In the next 25 years, we're going to need 3 times more energy than we've used in the last 200. How are we supposed to find all this energy? We can't. Not with our current energy sources, and certainly not as we shift more and more of it over to renewables. Our economy would come to a grinding halt. Life as we know it would cease to function. There would be riots in the streets. California has already made the switch to renewables, and now it has the highest rate of blackouts in America. That's why our government is pouring billions into this new technology I'm telling you about. It's getting ready to roll out nationwide. Unsurprisingly, this story may be one of the only initiatives with bipartisan support in Washington right now. Politicians across the country, from Wyoming to West Virginia, are rushing to bring this technology to their home states. Congress recently made the biggest investment in energy in U.S. history and approved almost $400 billion for the clean energy transition. $80 billion of that money is earmarked for this national rollout, with another $250 billion in guaranteed loans just to make sure our aging infrastructure stays online as we upgrade. The rollout's set to begin this year, with Congress scrambling to approve over 20 more bills to support it. That means billions more in funding could be available by December. Now you know I am so excited about what's coming, and maybe you've even guessed what it is. I'm talking about the most powerful, reliable energy source in history, key to meeting all our future energy needs and slashing carbon emissions, to say nothing of reestablishing America's independence from foreign countries. I'm talking about nuclear energy. Now, I'm sure you have strong feelings about this topic. Most people do. But this rollout is happening no matter how you feel about it. Georgia opened a new nuclear plant in 2023, America's first in more than 40 years, and another is scheduled to open this year. 8 other states are clamoring for reactors in their communities. Universities like Purdue and Indiana are looking into powering their campuses with nuclear energy. And Amazon just paid $650 million for a nuclear-powered facility in Pennsylvania, with enough energy to keep them running for the next 10 years. You can find all the backup for these claims on my details and disclosures page linked below. But here's the part that gets me most excited. You might think 8 states with reactors is nowhere near enough to support our energy needs. And you're right. That's why the U.S. Department of Energy selected nearly 400 coal plants across the country that qualify for transition into nuclear plants, with a 21st century upgrade, of course. And here's where those devices I was telling you about earlier come into play. Until now, nuclear plants required massive reactors on site, and you needed to design every inch of it custom. A nuclear plant used to cost billions of dollars and take a decade to build. Well, that's old nuclear. This is new nuclear. These new reactors are called Small Modular Reactors, or SMRs for short. And when I say small, I mean it. They're a fraction the size of the big, bulky reactors you might recognize. A single SMR can produce almost half the energy of an entire nuclear plant. Best of all, they produce all the energy we'll ever need. It comes down to their fuel source, uranium. When you split an atom of uranium, it releases more energy than any other energy source on the planet, 20,000 times more than the same amount of coal. You could meet all your energy needs for your entire life with a piece of uranium the size of a golf ball, without releasing any greenhouse gases. It's the silver bullet for all our energy goals. So why aren't we using more of it? Well, that's a fascinating story I'll tell you in a moment. But most importantly, the high cost of old-school reactors made nuclear energy too expensive to be practical. SMRs are changing all that. Modular means they're mass-produced on an assembly line with none of the time or expense needed to build a big facility. Now, SMRs are lining up to be the cheapest, most sustainable source of power on the planet. Best of all, they work well with the resources we already have. Stick a few SMRs in a coal plant, and you can turn the whole facility nuclear quicker and for a fraction of the cost of a traditional nuclear plant. You might think this is a story that'll take decades, but it's happening right now. Penn State is leading the charge on making Appalachia the new center of the nuclear industry, with the goal to have thousands of these next-generation reactors rolling off assembly lines. Bill Gates refuses to wait for the government rollout. He has already transitioned a coal plant in a former coal town in Wyoming. His new nuclear plant will power 400,000 homes and create more than 1,600 jobs. Recently, Gates took a tour of Glasgow, West Virginia, with an eye on helping this old coal town bring its own nuclear plants online. It's a critical part of his plan to use nuclear energy to power the East Coast. Gates says, nuclear power is the only carbon-free energy source we have that can deliver large amounts of power day and night through every season almost anywhere on Earth, and it has been proven to work on a large scale. So, nuclear power is coming, no matter how you feel about it. And mark my words, this is the wealth-building opportunity of your lifetime. Bigger than AI, bigger than FANG stocks or the Magnificent Seven, bigger than anything you've likely ever seen. And I say this as a guy who has profited from some of the biggest investing stories in history, including the birth of the internet. And take it from me, if you want to make serious money, nothing beats energy transitions. The past 200 years have seen more of them than in any other period in history, from burning wood to the steam engine to coal, oil, and gas, and all the innovations that go along with them, like electricity, automobiles, and railroads. And every step of the way, investors made eye-popping wealth. Early investors in Ford turned every $10,000 into $35 million. The railroads created some of the wealthiest people in the world at the time. So did oil. 100 years later, Time magazine was still calling it the greatest single source of wealth in America. As I'll show you, nuclear energy could end up bigger than all of that. And with early estimates at a $40 trillion industry and 12,000% growth in the coming years, I suspect this will be one of the biggest investment calls of my career. And just like with Amazon, I predict 99% of people who hear this message will still miss out on it. Why? Not because of ignorance, but because you've been misled in a big way. As I'll show you in a moment, there's been a decades-long misinformation campaign against nuclear energy, and it's come at a steep cost to you, me, and future generations. Let me show you how nuclear energy will change America for the better, make us healthier, happier, and for early investors, much richer. If you're skeptical about nuclear power, I get it. But stay with me, and I think you'll be surprised at how much your feelings start to change in the next couple of minutes. Actually, that's the perfect place for us to start. Let's look at the biggest concern people have. How dangerous is nuclear power, really? If you want to be safe at work, get a job at a nuclear power plant. I'm serious. OSHA has ranked it one of the safest jobs for decades. Our nuclear industry has fewer than one fatal injury per 100,000 workers. That's almost zero. Statistically, you'd have to wait 10 years to see a single death. You know what's the most dangerous job in America? Logging. Out of every 100,000 loggers, 132 of them can expect to die on the job. Yet when was the last time you saw logging accidents make the news? Coal mining deaths aren't as bad, but they're still terrible. 11 deaths for every 100,000 people. Tragically, that number doesn't include all the other deaths in the industry. 1 out of every 5 coal miners is now estimated to be suffering from black lung disease. 1,000 of them die from it every year. Nuclear energy, on the other hand, is light years safer. Not just safer than coal, but safer than every other energy source out there. The fatality rates aren't even close. Nuclear is near zero, while the pollution alone from coal, oil, and gas kills 8 million people worldwide every year. Nuclear is even cleaner than so-called clean energy. It produces 4 times less carbon pollution than solar farms. Now if you're thinking, Whitney, that's great, but what if the reactor blows up? Well, let's talk about that. When people think of nuclear safety, their minds often jump to the worst-case scenario, Chernobyl. And for good reason. Chernobyl was the worst nuclear accident in history. We're still dealing with the fallout many years later. Given how scary Chernobyl was, it's easy to forget how rare accidents like this actually are. Nuclear power plants have been around since the 1950s. In all that time, we've only had 3 major incidents. And keep in mind, there are hundreds of nuclear plants around the world today. While we're on the subject, did you know America's Navy runs on nuclear power? It's true. We started putting reactors in submarines in the 1950s. Today, all subs and aircraft carriers use nuclear power, and in almost 70 years, the Navy hasn't had a single accident. I don't say any of this to downplay tragedies like Chernobyl, but when you look at the track record, it's easier to see how safe modern nuclear technology really is. Is any of this a surprise? Would it surprise you even more to know Americans used to love nuclear energy? That after World War II, we dreamed it would power our cities, send us to the moon, and protect us from our enemies behind the Iron Curtain? That nuclear mania fueled the biggest uranium boom in history, with thousands of prospectors heading west hoping to strike it rich. That towns across America held Miss Uranium and Miss Atomic Age beauty pageants. President Eisenhower gave a speech at the United Nations where he said nuclear power was going to solve all the world's energy problems. He got a standing ovation. Our Navy started installing nuclear reactors in submarines and aircraft carriers, and like I said, has run on nuclear power ever since. It was a transformative time for America. No dream was too big. Nuclear energy was going to slingshot us into the future. That was the plan anyway. How did it all go wrong? The truth is, Eisenhower's UN speech might have inspired most people, but it scared the pants off big oil. Recognize this guy? John D. Rockefeller, one of the richest men in history and the biggest oil tycoon of the 19th century. By the 1950s, the Rockefellers were still one of the most powerful families in America, holding key positions in banking and politics. A year after Eisenhower gave his speech, the Rockefeller Foundation asked this man and his fellow scientists to look into the health effects of radiation. His name was Detlev Bronk. Bronk was one of the most prominent scientists in America at the time, and a board member of the Rockefeller Foundation. This guy was also on the board, Arthur Sulzberger, the publisher of the New York Times. So when Bronk's team of scientists concluded there was no safe amount of exposure to radiation, guess what appeared on the front page of the New York Times? Yes, you're reading that right. Quote, "A peril to the future of man." But wait a minute. By this point, scientists had been studying nuclear power for decades, and consensus was low levels of radiation weren't dangerous. Even the Rockefellers knew this. They'd been funding radiation research at the University of Texas for 30 years. And by the way, it's worth mentioning, we're already surrounded by radiation every day and have been for generations. We're exposed to low levels of it every time we fly on a plane, use our phones, or even go outside. The CDC has found even exposure to high levels of depleted and natural uranium has never caused cancer in animals or humans. You'd have to smoke about a pack of cigarettes a day for an entire year to get the same dose of radiation to the lungs as you would from inhaling a pound of uranium. I'm not recommending you try this, of course. My point is, radiation's a part of everyday life and has been for a long time. So why the exaggeration? Why scare people? Well, nuclear energy simply hadn't entered the civilian world before this, and it was a huge threat to the oil empire. The Rockefeller incident marked the start of a decades-long smear campaign against nuclear energy from the fossil fuel industry. In fact, fossil fuel companies quickly became one of the biggest donors to, are you ready? Environmental groups. If you think it's suspicious that environmental groups are in bed with fossil fuels, you're right. In the 1950s and 60s, environmentalists loved nuclear power. They knew it meant pollution-free electricity for a fraction of the land required for every other energy source we had. Then the fossil fuel industry showed up with some big checks. Friends of the Earth, an environmental group in more than 70 countries, was founded with seed money from an oil tycoon. Meanwhile, the Sierra Club, one of the biggest environmental groups in history, has heavily influenced Washington for over a century. They've literally rubbed elbows with American presidents, from Joe Biden to Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, all the way back to Theodore Roosevelt. The Sierra Club has also accepted more than $130 million from fossil fuel donors. Several other anti-nuclear groups have admitted to taking money from oil and gas. We don't know about Greenpeace, which refuses to name its donors and has no shame about it. All these groups have fought nuclear power for decades, supposedly because it's bad for the planet. But the money trail tells a different story. Today, the anti-nuclear industry is still very lucrative, with budgets totaling $2.3 billion annually. That's 14 times higher than pro-nuclear groups. Bottom line, there's a lot of money in promoting the anti-nuclear story. Another big villain here is the media, especially Hollywood, which has never let the facts get in the way of ticket sales. In 1979, a movie came out called The China Syndrome, starring environmentalist and anti-nuclear activist Jane Fonda. The film was about a meltdown at a fictional nuclear power plant and corrupt officials trying to cover it up. China syndrome was the idea that a nuclear meltdown could sink through the Earth's crust all the way to China, which is ridiculous and has no basis in reality. One scientist said, if they had stuck to the facts, there wouldn't have been a movie. Of course, the public didn't understand any of this. We were a generation past the heyday of nuclear mania in the US, in the middle of a terrifying Cold War, and environmentalists in the fossil fuel industry had been whispering in our ears for more than a decade. Anyway, the China syndrome was a huge hit. Then 12 days after the film opened, a reactor melted down at 3 Mile Island, and the media went nuts. Newspapers flat out compared the incident with the China syndrome. Politicians jumped on board too. Within hours, members of Congress were grilling scientists on live TV, demanding to know how close we'd come to a China syndrome meltdown. Meanwhile, the governor of Pennsylvania told people to evacuate, and the result was widespread panic. 140,000 people packed up their families and fled. State officials made plans to evacuate the city of Harrisburg. President Carter flew in personally to inspect the nuclear plant and restore calm. All this drama played out on TV screens across America and set off anti-nuclear activists around the country. 250,000 people marched on New York City and Washington. Others lined up outside theaters where the China syndrome was playing to tell us we'd barely avoided nuclear catastrophe. If you had vested interest in making sure nuclear power never took off, you couldn't have asked for better publicity. It didn't matter the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the agency overseeing everything nuclear in the US, said everything was okay, or that the incident was nothing like the China syndrome. It didn't matter nobody died, or that in the years since, dozens of reports concluded the response was far worse than the incident itself. 3 Mile Island cemented our fears of nuclear energy. The smear campaign was complete. By this point, the facts no longer mattered. So, where does that leave us? The sad result is today, America has forgotten its own history. Now, when we think of nuclear power, we think of Hollywood movies and radioactive monsters, or we think of duck and cover drills and school kids hiding under their desks. We forgot how excited we used to be about nuclear power, or that the 30 years of prosperity following World War II wasn't a fluke, it was all thanks to abundant energy. Electricity production shot up almost 1,000%. For the first time in history, the average person suddenly had access to all the energy they could want, cheap. We could grow more food, build bigger cities, power bigger factories, make more money, upgrade our lifestyles, you name it. We became one of the wealthiest nations in history. Nuclear power was supposed to take us to the next stage of energy abundance after that. Instead, America forgot its own legacy and learned to fear the best thing that ever happened to us. Here's the good news. All of this is changing. People are starting to see through the smear campaign. The latest polls show most Americans now favor nuclear power for the first time in years. And thanks to the next generation reactors I told you about earlier, nuclear energy has finally become affordable and easy to scale, just in time for a national rollout. This is it, a massive financial inflection point. I'm very excited about the nuclear story, and that I finally get to share it with you. I've followed many stories like this one over the course of my career, which is why I've been able to spot investment ideas long before the mainstream media finally clued people in. I help my followers see peak gains as high as 830% on Penn Entertainment, 8,300% on AutoZone, and almost 8,000% on Ross stores, and so on. I'm confident the nuclear renaissance will be the big investing story for years to come. Early estimates say nuclear power could become a $40 trillion industry, a growth of 12,000% from where it is today. And those are conservative estimates. To make sure you don't miss out, I've detailed my entire investment rationale for nuclear energy, plus selected the companies with the highest upside in this space in a brand new special report I'd like to send you today. It's called The Top Stocks for the Nuclear Renaissance. But if you're serious about getting rich on the nuclear renaissance, there are 3 things you should do right away. Number 1, how to profit on nuclear power. The first thing you must do, of course, is invest in small modular reactors, SMRs. The nuclear renaissance can't happen without them. And there's one very important reason for that, besides America's commitment to zero carbon by 2035. Nuclear is the only thing keeping the lights on right now. The world has already seen what happens when nuclear power goes down. Germany committed to shutting down its nuclear plants years ago. Now it has the most expensive electricity and the highest emissions in Europe. And it's more dependent than ever on Russian oil and gas. Looking closer to home, Texas now leads the United States in renewable energy usage, believe it or not. How's that working out? In California, things are so bad that despite all attempts to go 100% renewable, regulators have agreed to keep the state's only nuclear plant running another 5 years. All of this is bad enough. But there's another problem, even more pressing. Everybody's already pushing their nuclear plants to the limit. Plants only have a typical lifespan of 20 to 40 years. Some operators are now trying to push them to 80. We're also desperate for more energy. Researchers are debating if we can push them to 100. By 2030, 2/3 of the world's nuclear power plants will be running on borrowed time, splitting atoms longer than they were ever designed or licensed to. We're running out of time. And this isn't just happening in America. 50 other countries are building out their nuclear programs. Mark my words, each of these countries are turning to SMRs to solve their crisis. In fact, the International Atomic Energy Agency has already identified more than 80 of these small reactors in development around the world. One by one, these SMRs will slowly replace over 3,000 of the world's coal plants, and the investors who see this coming stand to make huge gains. We're at the beginning of a massive growth curve. Right now, the SMR market is only worth $6 billion. That number is expected to soar 4,800%. Let me be clear, this is a long-term investment opportunity, and we're still at the beginning of its story. Your state could continue to grow for the next 5, 10, 20 years. Is that worth it to you for the payoff I'm showing here? I know what my answer would be. So that's step 1. Own SMR companies, but they have to be the right companies. Like I said, there are 80 of these small reactors in development. Not all of them will make it, but I've just pinpointed one company you should buy immediately. The company is already profitable and highly visible. It just beat out a dozen others for more than $400 million in government contracts. Pretty soon, you could see their SMRs deployed around the country after the next hurricane or flood. And by the way, the company doesn't just make SMRs. It's also a leading contender in uranium production. In fact, it's received another $120 million in government contracts just for that. I'll share a full write-up, including its stock ticker, with you in my newest report, The Top Stocks for the Nuclear Renaissance. Of course, the nuclear rollout is much bigger than SMRs. We're talking about an upgrade to our entire electrical grid, which means you need to know the companies that'll keep it running. Which brings me to step 2. Invest in the right utility companies. You need to own the best nuclear operators in the US, and I've already identified 2 names you absolutely need to know about. Company number 1 currently owns or operates almost half of the nuclear power plants in America. It's a Fortune 200 company with plenty of room to run. It's also a big recipient of the tens of billions of dollars of government earmarks just for clean energy production. The company's sitting on almost $400 million in cash as of the end of 2023, and it's not afraid to put its money where its mouth is. Last year, it spent $1 billion buying back its own stock, and it has just announced plans to buy back another $1 billion of its shares. To top it off, its biggest investors include Vanguard and BlackRock, which most recently owned almost 60 million shares between them. Company number 2 is the largest competitive power generator in America, serving 20 million homes, but I bet you've never even heard of it. Right now, it's only the 4th largest nuclear energy producer, but it just acquired one of the nation's biggest nuclear fleets. So it's about to become the next biggest competitor behind the other company I just told you about. And if you need any more urging, its biggest backers include billionaires Ray Dalio, Steve Cohen, and Dan Loeb. You should follow their lead. And this brings me to our next critical play. SMRs, nuclear plants, utility companies, they all need uranium, and lots of it. A ramp up in nuclear power naturally means a ramp up in uranium demand. That's why, number 3, we're looking at one of the largest uranium bull markets of our lifetimes. We don't have enough uranium, nowhere close. Right now, we need about 3 metric tons of it to keep the lights on, and the government estimates we'll need 400 metric tons by 2030. That's a growth of 13,000% in the next few years. America used to be the world's leading producer of uranium until anti-nuclear panic killed the industry. We went from producing millions of pounds a year to almost zero. Today, we've only got a handful of working uranium mines left. We're totally dependent on uranium imported from other countries. And one of our biggest suppliers? Russia. You might remember President Biden made a big deal about sanctioning Russia over Ukraine. But what you probably don't know is at the same time, we were quietly paying Russia billions of dollars for their uranium. Thankfully, the federal government has finally declared this a national security risk and is acting accordingly. The White House has approved $2.7 billion in emergency funding for America's uranium industry and is already asking for billions more. Unless we move fast, we're going to be short 40 million pounds of uranium a year for the next decade. Utility companies have spent the last 2 years stockpiling uranium, expecting our Russian supply to get cut off any day. Countries around the world, including Canada, France, Japan, and the UK, are scrambling to do the same. In fact, the US just signed an agreement with all these countries to build a strong uranium supply and wean the world off Russian uranium. It's a massive undertaking for sure, and I won't mince words. We're facing the very real prospect of a uranium crisis. It also means we're looking at a gigantic uranium bull market. Prices have doubled in the past 2 years, and in January, they just broke the $100 mark for the first time since 2007. That's nothing. Once demand really takes off, we might not see prices this low ever again. So if you want to take advantage of the uranium boom, now is your moment. I've got 2 uranium stocks at the top of my recommended buy list. You'll also find their names and ticker symbols, plus a full write-up of each in my newest report, The Top Stocks for the Nuclear Renaissance. I'm sharing this report absolutely free with members of my research service, and I'd love for you to join us. Now, you might be wondering why a guy like me left Wall Street. Well, it's a funny story. At the end of the day, I'm just a guy who grew up in a working-class family. My parents were teachers who knew how to squeeze a dollar, but didn't know anything when it came to finance. But I've always had the firm belief that if you want to succeed at anything in life, you need to go where the action is. That's why I've attended Berkshire Hathaway's annual meetings for more than 25 consecutive years. I've learned a lot from Warren Buffett, personally and professionally, and consider him my mentor and North Star when it comes to investing. And take it from me, when you make it a habit of going to where the action is, you start to notice things most people miss. For example, a few years ago, I blew the whistle on a company called Lumber Liquidators. At the time, they were the biggest and fastest growing retailer of hardwood floors in North America. But I got suspicious after the stock skyrocketed. The numbers I was seeing were just too good to be true. So I got my hands on the company's Chinese-made flooring and had it tested in a lab, and we quickly discovered why things weren't adding up. Turns out Lumber Liquidators was cutting corners by buying the cheapest flooring from China. So cheap it was made with formaldehyde, a known carcinogen, at 5 times or more the legal limit. I thought the story was so compelling that I took it to 60 Minutes and they agreed. They ultimately invited me on to share my story with Anderson Cooper. Our investigation got the attention of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. That's when the government showed up. The U.S. Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Lumber Liquidators with fraud, triggering a wave of lawsuits. The company ended up paying out $36 million in settlements. 60 Minutes won an Emmy for their work covering the story. And I was short the stock, which collapsed 80% after we went public. I made $4 million for my clients. If you haven't noticed, I'm not afraid of digging to get the truth, even if it means rattling some cages. But like I said, you need to go where the action is. Being in the right place at the right time opens doors you can't find anywhere else. Every successful person on the planet knows this. Heck, when I started my hedge fund, the first person I called for advice was my friend Bill Ackman. He's the reason I started following Warren Buffett in the first place. Years later, when I left money management and decided to bring what I learned to regular folks, Bill was one of my first subscribers, along with David Einhorn, Joel Greenblatt, Leon Cooperman, and Seth Klarman, all friends of mine and billionaires. The work I do is good enough for the brightest financial minds in the world, but written for the average person. In fact, one of my subscribers told me he made $10 million in less than 6 months, thanks to the information I was sharing. I publish a suite of investment research, but I'm including my new report in Commodity Supercycles, which I'd like to give you access to today at no risk. My Commodity Supercycles team and I share the belief that if you want to find the best investing ideas in the world, you need to actually go find them. That's why I send the people who work on this service on all sorts of due diligence trips. Our research team was among just a handful of people invited to tour Canada's Yukon Territory, where they interviewed miners, investors, and CEOs launching new products in gold country. They've even traveled to the Russian Far East, where the gold mines there are so remote you could only reach them by helicopter. Is it a lot of extra work? You bet. But that's what you have to do to get the real story sometimes. Just ask my senior analyst who spent 20 years as a professional investor. He has been responsible for managing billions of dollars in capital and has covered almost every industry around the world. I can't think of a team better qualified to guide you on the nuclear story as it unfolds. Their commitment to detail has helped them close out gains like 264% on Kaminak Gold, 321% on Jinshan gold mines, 151% on Mag Silver, 339% on Silver Wheaton, 251% on Silvercorp, and 330% on Northern Dynasty. Keep in mind, the 3-year annualized average return of Commodity Supercycles was 11%. This return measures the results achieved by all of our recommendations from 2020 to 2023, scaled to a 1-year period. And of course, all investments have some degree of risk. I would never recommend investing any amount you aren't willing to lose. But commodity markets are cyclical, and we're heading into a massive bull market for uranium and a leap forward for nuclear power in general. And we're going to show you how to take advantage of all of it. All the answers on uranium and our other nuclear energy plays are waiting for you inside our newest research report, The Top Stocks for the Nuclear Renaissance. To get your copy immediately, all I ask is that you take a no-risk trial subscription to our research service. As soon as you join, you'll receive instant access to the top stocks for the nuclear renaissance, plus our entire model portfolio of investments in energy, metals, and natural resources. You'll see for yourself how our picks are performing and if Commodity Supercycles is right for you. If not, just let us know and we'll refund every penny. And please, whatever else you do, don't wait to act on our nuclear plays. You literally can't afford to wait. I'm speaking from experience. One of the tough things about my job is no matter how hard I bang the drum about something, I know that statistically, most people are still going to miss the boat. If it weren't so, there'd be millionaires on every street corner. That's why I'm committed to getting this nuclear story in front of the right people as quickly as possible, and I don't want life circumstances holding anybody back. So I've instructed my team to cut a special deal for folks who join Commodity Supercycles today. Right now, membership runs $199 a year, and we could raise that price in the future. But when you join today, you'll only pay $49. That's 75% off the regular price. Again, try it out for 30 days. If you're not happy for whatever reason, give my customer service team a ring and tell them you'd like a full refund. It's that simple. But all that said, I think you'll be impressed. You're just minutes away from getting the names of the best companies in the nuclear energy space right now, and how to take advantage of them before the rest of the world catches up. If you stick with us, every month we'll email you a brand new issue with any opportunities we're seeing in the commodities space and how they could land you outsized profits, not just in nuclear energy, but also oil and gas, renewables, rare metals, agriculture, natural resources, and much more. If it's a precious resource America depends on, you'll hear about it. And there's 3 more reasons why you should consider joining today. Number 1, all the research you'll receive the instant you join. First, we'll make sure you hit the ground running the moment you sign up. Here's everything you'll receive. First, the top stocks for the nuclear renaissance. This special report is your guide to understanding and profiting from one of the biggest investing opportunities of our lifetimes. We're including the names and tickers of the companies spearheading the nuclear rollout across America and why you should consider investing in them right away. You'll also receive 12 issues of Commodity Supercycles. Each new issue will be delivered to you the second Monday of every month and is designed to help you understand and take advantage of the world's most promising investment opportunities in the energy and natural resource space. You're getting much more than just new stock recommendations every month. Each email is a full education about how to be a successful commodities trader, up-to-date analysis of what's happening in the market, and of course, detailed analysis on the companies worth your consideration. Folks who join today will also receive some special bonuses like the secret currency, how to make 500% from the US government's second secret currency. In this special report, I'll share details on a secret investment used by dozens of the world's richest families, from the Rothschilds to the DuPonts, even some of America's founding fathers, plus other names you'd recognize like Jackie Onassis and JP Morgan. Few Americans know this investment exists, let alone how to potentially get rich off it. And before you ask, it's not stocks, options, mutual funds, real estate, or bullion. It's actually a form of gold and silver, one that for decades has seen incredible returns as high as 500% to 1,000%. In the late 1980s, it returned 665%, even as stocks went over a cliff. We're seeing a similar setup in the market today and believe you could more than double your money with this investment no matter what stocks are doing. You'll also receive the number 1 gold stock to buy in 2024. If you own no other gold stock in your portfolio, make sure it's this one. Gold's the ultimate crisis hedge, and gold prices have just hit all-time highs. But you need to be choosy about where you put your money. Our number 1 pick is a tiny gold firm I doubt you've heard of. Here's what makes it special. The company owns a cut of the profits, also known as royalties, in high-quality gold mines around the world. I love royalty companies because they have no ongoing capital costs. They provide the capital up front, and after that enjoy a share of the profits without having to worry about actually running a gold mine themselves. This takes a lot of risk out of a notoriously risky industry. If one gold mine goes bust, you've got others. This firm currently has around 250 royalties in its portfolio. In fact, its portfolio is not only one of the biggest in the world, it's also one of the most diverse, not just in gold, but other precious metals like silver and copper. And they're growing fast with cash flows of more than $100 million a year. That number is expected to almost double in the next 5 years. Incredibly, you can still invest in them right now for around $5. You'll find all the details on this opportunity in our special report, The Number 1 Gold Stock to Buy in 2024. Yours free when you join Commodity Supercycles. And last but not least, the silver trade. This special report covers a rare setup we're seeing in the market, and we project it could net 5 to 10 times your money over the next few years. It has to do with America's debt crisis. The federal deficit is on track to hit $2 trillion this year, and that's expected to double over the next decade. Meanwhile, American consumers themselves are in record amounts of debt on credit cards, auto loans, you name it. The only way out is for the government to cancel the debt, and forgiving pandemic loans and student debt were just the beginning. I predict we're going to see a wave of debt forgiveness, and it'll send the markets into a tailspin. But here's the thing. Whenever there's a shakeup in the financial markets, silver goes wild. In the wake of the 2008 crisis, one silver firm soared over 900%. In this special report, we'll show you how silver could outperform even gold and share a unique strategy to take advantage in the months ahead. You'll get a full breakdown on all these opportunities, including our top recommendations, their ticker symbols, and how to buy them. These reports are among the first things you'll get with a 30-day trial to Commodity Supercycles. And every month after, you'll receive an email with any new opportunities and how to play them. There's another reason you should join today. Number 2, free membership to one of the longest, most successful research services in America. I recently had the incredible fortune to partner with one of America's biggest research firms, Stansberry Research. Since 1999, Stansberry has introduced folks to some of the best investing ideas in the world, quickly earning a reputation for speaking the truth about the markets, even when doing so was contrarian or unpopular. They launched the business with their flagship service, Stansberry's Investment Advisory, still considered the crown jewel of the business and eagerly followed by 100,000 readers every month. For years, the firm's founder, my good friend Porter Stansberry, wrote and edited every issue himself, with a focus on showing folks how to make money from the most promising emerging trends and the most influential economic forces affecting the market on any given day. In fact, Porter often gave readers a heads up on groundbreaking news before even Wall Street knew what was going on. Readers of Stansberry's Investment Advisory got advance warning about the fall of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac 5 months before they collapsed in 2008, as well as the dot-com bust, including which companies would survive. Today, Stansberry's Investment Advisory still has one of the best track records in the business. As of March, its open portfolio is up 138%. But the most exciting part for me is it has no fewer than 12 positions currently doing triple digits or higher, as high as 1,300%. That's almost unheard of in financial publishing. It's an incredible service, one that shares my passion for finding the biggest investment ideas before everyone else. And I'm excited to announce I've recently accepted a new position as its lead editor. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm so passionate about the work we're doing and how we're helping hardworking folks get ahead that I'd like you to be a part of it, especially if you want to stay ahead of the curve. Normally, membership runs $199 a year, but when you accept my invitation today to join Commodity Supercycles, I'll include membership to Stansberry's Investment Advisory absolutely free. That means you'll enjoy membership to both services for the low price of only $49. Like I said, I want to get this information into the hands of as many people as possible, and I don't want life's circumstances holding anyone back. And there's one final reason you should consider joining us. Number 3, thousands of happy subscribers. Given everything I've just shared, the track record, the results, the first dibs on incredible research you can't find anywhere else, maybe you can see why Stansberry has some of the happiest and most loyal readers in the business. Kathleen S. just wrote recently to us to say, I joined Stansberry 22 years ago after reviewing many communiques, but yours stood out with Porter's exceptional open concept of bringing the average investor into the process and educating them. I've done well enough myself that my financial planner handles the bonds, but I handle my own stocks using your portfolios as a guide. He keeps saying how well I'm doing and to keep doing it. Thank you. Peter P. says, I'm not one to brag, but I've benefited greatly with Netflix and Tesla. Several other winners are still going strong, and I'm holding for now. I'm semi-retired and still work part-time as an engineering consultant. I manage about 20% of my assets myself and have been doing very well, much better than my investments at JP Morgan. And Jimmy P. says, my brother introduced me to Stansberry in the early 2000s, and after seeing him make fabulous investment gains, I subscribed to Stansberry's Investment Advisory around the same time I retired in 2008. I'm holding 2 of your recommendations, both of which have grown splendidly. I think these endorsements say more than I could ever say about Stansberry and how they've changed the game for many folks over the past 20+ years. I know our firm's research can help you too. And for just $49, we'll send you all the research I promised you today, including free membership in Stansberry's investment advisory. For just $49, what do you have to lose? And remember, when you accept this invitation, you're doing so without risking a penny. If you're not happy in the next 30 days, simply call our customer service team, and they will promptly refund all your money. And no matter what, you'll still have our nuclear stock picks. I urge you to act on them ASAP. You're about to join a group of folks who understand the massive shifts happening in America today and the best ways to profit from them, long before it finally makes the Wall Street Journal. To get started, just click the Get Started button below. You'll be taken to a secure order form where you can review the details of this generous offer before you complete your purchase. I can't wait to welcome you.